The road from Seville stretched before him like a dusty ribbon, winding through groves of ancient olive trees that had witnessed centuries pass in patient silence. Our pharmacist, let us not burden him with a name, for he could be any man of his trade in that year of 1885, shifted uncomfortably on the wooden seat of the public coach. His fellow passengers, a mix of merchants and farmers, dozed or chatted in the thick Andalusian dialect that still, after all his years in the South, occasionally eluded his understanding. He was 38 years old that spring, though the recent months had aged him in ways that numbers could not capture. A change of scene, his colleague in Seville had suggested, pressing the letter of invitation into his hands. The Montemayor estate needs someone to catalog their greenhouse collection. Perfect for a man of your expertise. The colleague had not mentioned it would also be perfect for a man running from the ghost of an empty house. The pharmacist's fingers found the vial in his vest pocket. Laudanum, his own preparation, untouched for 3 days now. Progress, he supposed, though the temptation remained. Strange how a man who spent his life measuring precise doses for others could so easily lose count when it came to his own pain. His wife would have scolded him for the irony. But then she had been gone 4 months now, taken by the very consumption his remedies could only ease, never cure. Through the coach window, the landscape shifted from the fertile Vegas to the rolling hills that announced the approach to the Montemayor lands. Cork oaks replaced olives, their thick trunks stripped in sections, revealing the rust-colored flesh beneath. The sight reminded him of his work, the careful peeling away of bark to reach the medicinal properties within. Everything in nature had its purpose, its hidden chemistry waiting to be understood. "First time to Las Gardenias?" The question came from a thin merchant seated across from him, dealing in leather goods by the smell of him. The pharmacist nodded. "I've been commissioned for botanical work." "Ah, Don Ricardo's famous greenhouse." The merchant's expression shifted as if tasting something slightly sour. "They say he spent a fortune bringing plants from the Americas. His wife, Doña Isabel, she has delicate health. Perhaps your work will help her." There was something in the man's tone, a careful neutrality that spoke volumes. The pharmacist had learned in his years of practice that the things people didn't say often mattered more than their words. He made a non-committal sound and returned his gaze to the window. The estate announced itself first through its walls, whitewashed stone that gleamed in the afternoon sun, topped with iron spikes that seemed more decorative than defensive. Beyond them, he glimpsed the main house, a structure that married Moorish arches with modern European sensibilities. It was the kind of place that proclaimed its owner's wealth without shouting, a careful balance that spoke of old money learning new ways. As the coach pulled to a stop at the estate's gates, the pharmacist gathered his modest luggage, a leather case with his essential tools, a trunk of reference books, and a smaller bag of personal effects. The gatekeeper, a man whose sun-weathered face suggested decades of service, examined the letter of invitation with unnecessary thoroughness. "You're expected," he finally announced, as if this were news. The walk from the gate to the main house followed a path lined with orange trees, their blossoms filling the air with a scent so intense it made him slightly dizzy. Or perhaps it was the heat, unseasonably warm for April, pressing down like a physical weight. He found himself cataloging automatically. Citrus sinensis, the sweet orange, introduced by the Moors centuries ago, its oils useful for digestive complaints, its flowers for nervous conditions. The housekeeper who met him at the door was a woman in her 50s, dressed in severe black that made her silver hair seem to glow. Esperanza, she introduced herself, and her handshake was firm, businesslike. Don Ricardo is in Seville today on business. He'll return tomorrow to discuss your work. I'll show you to your quarters. She led him through hallways where religious paintings watched with dark eyes, past furniture that belonged in a museum, through air thick with the competing scents of beeswax, lavender, and something else. Something floral but wrong somehow, like a note played slightly off-key. His trained nose twitched, trying to identify it, but Esperanza's brisk pace allowed no lingering. His room was on the second floor, modest but comfortable, with a view of the famous greenhouse. The structure was impressive, even from a distance. Iron and glass in the modern style, larger than some churches he'd known. "Dinner is at 9, Esperanza informed him. "The family observes town hours, not country ones. You'll dine with the staff tonight." Left alone, he unpacked methodically, arranging his books and instruments with the precision that had become both comfort and compulsion. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent, painting the greenhouse gold and red. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly, and he heard footsteps, light, hesitant, stopping frequently, as if the walker were unsure of their destination. The pharmacist moved to the window, drawn by movement in the garden below. A woman in pale blue walked among the orange trees, her pace dreamy, one hand trailing along the leaves. Even from this distance, he could see she was young, beautiful in that fragile way that suggested careful preservation. She stopped suddenly, her hand going to her temple, swaying slightly. A maid rushed from the shadows to steady her. Doña Isabel, he presumed. The delicate health the merchant had mentioned was apparently no exaggeration. As he watched, she allowed herself to be led back toward the house, her steps slow but dignified. Just before she disappeared from view, she looked up, directly at his window. Even across the distance, he could see her eyes, large, dark, filled with something that might have been curiosity or might have been fear. The pharmacist stepped back from the window, disturbed without knowing why. In his vest pocket, the laudanum vial seemed to pulse with possibility. Not tonight, he told himself. He had work to do here, puzzles to solve that had nothing to do with his own grief. The dinner bell rang somewhere deep in the house, bronze and solemn. He straightened his coat, checked his appearance in the spotted mirror, and prepared to descend into whatever mysteries this house held. Don Ricardo de Montemayor possessed the kind of hands that had never known true labor. Smooth, manicured, with a gold signet ring that caught the morning light as he gestured. The pharmacist sat across from him in the study, a room that smelled of Cuban tobacco and old leather, trying to read the man who had summoned him from Seville. "Your reputation precedes you," Don Ricardo began, his Castilian Spanish precise, educated. "They say you have the finest nose in Andalusia for botanical work, that you can identify a plant's properties from its scent alone." The pharmacist inclined his head slightly. It was true, though he'd never thought of it as a gift until his wife had pointed it out. "Years of practice, senor. The nose can be trained like any other tool." "Good. Because I need more than just a catalog." Don Ricardo rose, moved to the window overlooking his domain. He was 45, the pharmacist judged, but carried himself like a younger man fighting against time. "My greenhouse contains specimens from 3 continents. The previous pharmacist, he died last winter, was conducting experiments with hybridization. I need someone to complete his work, create therapeutic preparations. There was something else, though. The pharmacist had learned to wait for the real reason people sought his services. It rarely matched the initial request. "Your wife," he ventured. "The merchant on the coach mentioned she suffers from delicate health." Don Ricardo's shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. "My wife suffers from what the local doctor calls nervous exhaustion. But I believe—" He turned, and there was something raw in his expression before he mastered it. "I believe she is cursed." The word hung in the air like incense. The pharmacist kept his expression neutral, though internally he sighed. How often science was called upon to battle superstition, especially here in the South, where old beliefs ran deep as water through limestone. "Tell me about this curse." "Every night, between midnight and dawn, her bedroom fills with the scent of gardenias. Overwhelming, suffocating. She wakes with migraines, sometimes faints. We've searched everywhere. No flowers, no source. The servants whisper about spirits." His laugh was bitter. "They call it the Gardenia curse, as if the estate's very name mocks us." The pharmacist's interest sharpened. A mysterious scent with no visible source. This was the kind of puzzle that made his work worthwhile. "How long has this been happening?" "6 months, since autumn last year." "And you've tried everything? New bedding, different rooms, priests with their blessed water? Nothing works. She grows weaker each week." 6 months. The pharmacist filed this away. "I'd like to examine the room, with your permission, and meet Doña Isabel, if her health permits." "She's in the morning room. Her strength is best before noon." Don Ricardo moved toward the door, then paused. "I should warn you. My wife is given to fancies. She believes someone wishes her harm. The isolation, perhaps, or the illness itself affecting her mind." They walked through corridors where portraits of stern ancestors watched their passage. The morning room faced east, flooded with light that made the pale yellow walls glow like butter. Doña Isabel sat at an embroidery frame, her needle moving in precise mechanical motions. She was more beautiful up close than she had appeared in the garden. 29 years old, with the kind of beauty that belonged in paintings. But there were shadows under her eyes, a tremor in her hands that spoke of exhaustion deeper than simple fatigue. "Isabel, this is the pharmacist from Seville." She looked up, and again he was struck by her eyes, intelligent, alert, despite the physical weakness. "Another doctor?" Her voice carried a note of weary resignation. "A botanical specialist, Signora. I'm here to study the greenhouse collection." Something flickered in her expression. Relief? Disappointment? "Of course. Ricardo's plants. They're his great passion." The words were neutral, but the pharmacist heard layers beneath them. "I understand you've been unwell. Perhaps some of the specimens might yield remedies." She smiled, an expression that didn't reach her eyes. How modern, using science to fight phantoms. She swayed slightly, her maid, a young woman with sharp, intelligent features, stepping forward immediately. "You should rest, Signora," the maid said. "Carmen," the pharmacist remembered from the staff introductions at dinner. "Yes, I should." Doña Isabel stood carefully. "Tell me, Signor Pharmacist, do you believe in curses?" He considered his answer. "I believe in causes and effects, Signora. Sometimes the causes are simply hidden from view. How comforting to know that suffering has reason, even if we cannot see it. She moved toward the door, then paused. The greenhouse is particularly beautiful in the late afternoon. The light through the glass. It's like being inside a jewel. After she left, Don Ricardo's expression was unreadable. She wasn't always so philosophical. The illness has changed her, or perhaps, the pharmacist thought, it had revealed her. But he kept this observation to himself. The greenhouse exceeded his expectations. The moment he stepped inside, the humid air embraced him, thick with the scent of earth and green growth. The structure was divided into climate zones: tropical, Mediterranean, arid, each section a small world unto itself. His trained eye immediately spotted valuable specimens: Digitalis purpurea for heart conditions, Atropa belladonna for various preparations, Papaver somniferum, opium poppies, surprisingly, though perfectly legal for medicinal use. But it was the organization that intrigued him most. The previous pharmacist had been methodical, his notes left in neat volumes on a workbench. The man had been experimenting with concentrated essences, distillations that could capture a plant's properties in powerful doses. Some of the equipment was sophisticated, expensive, apparatus the pharmacist himself could barely afford. Signor Martin was quite devoted to his work. Esperanza's voice came from behind him. The housekeeper had appeared silently, a skill that must serve her well in this house of secrets. He spent more time here than in his own quarters. What happened to him? Heart failure. He was 73, worked until the end. Don Ricardo found him here one morning, slumped over his workbench. She paused. He was working on something special for Doña Isabel. A cure, he claimed. For her current affliction? Esperanza's expression was carefully blank. She wasn't ill then. Not with the Gardenias. That started after. After. The word lodged in the pharmacist's mind like a seed. He spent the rest of the morning cataloging, but his thoughts kept returning to the timeline. An old pharmacist dies. Months later, mysterious symptoms appear. In his experience, coincidences were rarely coincidental. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the estate, he stood in the garden beneath Doña Isabel's window. The room was dark. She retired early, he'd learned. The orange blossoms released their evening perfume, almost overwhelming in its sweetness. But beneath it, carried on the warm air, he caught something else, faint, barely there, but unmistakable to his trained senses. Gardenias, but wrong somehow. Synthetic. Like the ghost of a flower rather than the flower itself. The puzzle was beginning to reveal its shape, though he couldn't yet see the picture it would form. In his room, he opened his notebook and began to write, documenting everything he'd observed. The laudanum vial sat untouched on the nightstand. Tonight he had better medicine, a mystery that demanded solving. The pharmacist had been at the estate for 5 days when Don Ricardo made his unusual request. "I want you to witness it yourself," he said over breakfast, his coffee growing cold as he spoke. "Tonight. You'll see that this is no ordinary illness." The day passed with deliberate slowness. The pharmacist worked in the greenhouse, distilling essences from feverfew for headache remedies, but his mind wandered to the coming night. He'd prepared a small kit, glass vials for air samples, strips of cloth to absorb scents, his notebook with pages already marked for observations. Carmen found him among the medicinal herbs as the sun began its descent. "Doña Isabel asks if you'll take tea with her," she said, though her expressions suggested this was more command than invitation. He found the lady of the house in the small library, a room he hadn't yet entered. Unlike the formal spaces with their heavy furniture and religious paintings, this room felt lived in. Books lined the walls, many with worn spines, suggesting frequent reading. Doña Isabel sat near a window, the late afternoon light making her pale skin seem almost translucent. "You going to observe my affliction tonight?" It wasn't a question. "Ricardo arranges these viewings as if I were a specimen in his greenhouse." The pharmacist chose his words carefully. "Understanding requires observation, Signora, but I assure you, my interest is purely in finding a solution." She studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. "You know, the previous pharmacist, Signor Martin, he had theories about the connection between scent and memory. He said certain smells could transport us through time, make us relive moments we'd rather forget. The olfactory sense does have strong connections to memory," he agreed, accepting the tea Carmen poured. It was an unusual blend. Chamomile, certainly, but with something else. Valerian root, perhaps. "Gardenias were my mother's favorite flower," Doña Isabel continued, her voice distant. "She wore the oil as perfume. Died when I was 7. Sometimes I wonder if this curse is her way of visiting." The pharmacist noted the slight pause before visiting. What had she really meant to say? Haunting? Punishing? "When did you last see actual gardenias, Signora?" "At my wedding, 3 years ago this September. Ricardo had them brought from Valencia, knowing the story of my mother." It was, she paused, choosing her words, a thoughtful gesture. 3 years of marriage, 6 months of mysterious illness. The mathematics of unhappiness were becoming clearer. The pharmacist sipped his tea, noting its slightly bitter undertaste. Definitely valerian, and something else. Passion flower, maybe? Calming herbs. Someone in this house knew their botanical medicine. As night fell, the house transformed. Shadows gathered in corners like conspirators. The servants moved more quietly, as if afraid to disturb whatever came with darkness. The pharmacist positioned himself in the sitting room, adjacent to Doña Isabel's bedroom, Don Ricardo beside him, tense as a wound spring. "It usually begins around midnight," Don Ricardo whispered, though there was no need for quiet yet, sometimes earlier if the night is warm. They waited. The pharmacist could hear the house settling, wood contracting as the day's heat dissipated. Somewhere, a clock ticked with metronomic persistence. Don Ricardo shifted in his chair, cleared his throat, shifted again. A man uncomfortable with stillness, with the helplessness of waiting. At 20 minutes past midnight, it began. The scent crept in like fog, subtle at first, then growing stronger. Gardenias. But Don Ricardo was right. There was something unnatural about it. The pharmacist's trained nose detected the layers, the top note too sharp, the middle notes missing entirely, the base note lingering too long. This wasn't the complex bouquet of a living flower, but something constructed, artificial. He rose quietly, moving toward the bedroom door. Through the gap beneath, the scent poured out like invisible smoke. Inside, he could hear Doña Isabel's breathing becoming labored, a soft moan of distress. Don Ricardo made to follow, but the pharmacist gestured for him to stay back. The smell was strongest near the walls, he noticed. He ran his hand along the corridor wall, silk wallpaper, expensive, with a raised pattern of vines and flowers. The fabric felt slightly warm to the touch, though the night was cool. Interesting. "She'll wake soon," Don Ricardo said, his voice tight with familiar anguish. "The headaches start next." Indeed, they heard movement from the bedroom, then Carmen's soothing voice. The maid had been sleeping on a cot in the antechamber, ready to attend her mistress. The pharmacist admired the girl's dedication. Or was it something else that kept her so close to Doña Isabel's suffering? He pulled out a vial, captured some of the scented air, sealed it quickly. Then another sample from near the floor, another from beside the wall. Don Ricardo watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "You think you can bottle a curse?" "I think I can analyze it," the pharmacist replied. He was about to say more when Doña Isabel's door opened. She stood there in her nightgown and wrapper, Carmen supporting her. Even in the dim lamplight, he could see the sheen of perspiration on her forehead, the way she pressed her fingers to her temples. "It's particularly strong tonight," she said, her voice strained. "Like someone spilled an entire bottle of perfume." The pharmacist approached carefully. "Señora, may I ask, does the scent seem to come from any particular direction?" She looked at him with surprise, as if no one had asked her this before. "From everywhere. But if I had to choose, the walls, perhaps? How strange to say that." The walls. He filed this confirmation away. "And the temperature in your room?" "Warm. Always warm during these episodes, even in winter." She swayed, and Carmen tightened her grip. "I should lie down." As the women retreated to the bedroom, Don Ricardo's expression was grim. "You see? How does one fight an enemy made of air?" The pharmacist didn't answer immediately. He was thinking of the greenhouse, of the old pharmacist's experiments with concentrated essences, of silk wallpaper that felt warm to the touch. The pieces were arranging themselves in his mind like a chemical formula, though he couldn't yet see the complete equation. They remained in vigil until 3 in the morning, when the scent finally began to fade. Don Ricardo had dozed off in his chair, exhaustion defeating vigilance. The pharmacist used the time to explore the corridor, examining the wallpaper more closely with a small magnifying glass he'd brought. The pattern was intricate. French, probably, from one of the workshops in Lyon that specialized in luxury fabrics. In certain spots, the fabric showed subtle discoloration, barely visible in the lamplight. Water damage? No, the pattern was too regular. Heat, perhaps. He thought of the fireplace in Doña Isabel's room, the way heat rose and spread along walls. Dawn was breaking when he finally returned to his room. He arranged his samples carefully on the desk, then opened his notebook to record his observations. The synthetic quality of the scent troubled him. In his experience, artificial fragrances were expensive to produce, requiring specific knowledge and materials. Who in this house had such knowledge? The dead pharmacist, certainly, but dead men don't create curses. They leave behind tools for the living to use. He thought of Doña Isabel's words about her wedding, the Gardenias from Valencia, Don Ricardo's thoughtful gesture. He thought of the timeline, the old pharmacist's death, the months of delay, then the sudden onset of symptoms. He thought of Don Ricardo's tension, which seemed to contain not just worry, but something else. Guilt? Fear of discovery? The pharmacist closed his notebook and prepared for a few hours of sleep. In the greenhouse that afternoon, he would begin his real investigation. The old pharmacist's laboratory would have answers. They always did, if one knew which questions to ask. Sunday morning in rural Andalusia carried its own particular weight. The bells of the parish church commanding attendance with bronze authority. The pharmacist adjusted his best coat, a black wool affair that was too warm for the season, but appropriate for the occasion. Respectability had its costs, measured in sweat as much as pesetas. The Montemayor family traveled to Mass in their carriage, leaving the pharmacist to walk with the upper servants. Esperanza led their small procession, her black dress impeccable despite the dust that rose with each step. Carmen walked beside him, clearly pleased to have someone new to talk with. "Doña Isabel was better this morning," she offered quietly. "The Saturday episodes are always the worst. It's as if the curse knows when society expects her to appear at her best." Curious phrasing, the pharmacist thought, as if the affliction had consciousness, intention. "She attends many social functions?" "Before the illness, yes. The spring balls in Seville, the harvest celebrations. Don Ricardo's business requires it. The English buyers expect entertainment with their olive oil negotiations." Carmen lowered her voice further. "Now he goes alone. People talk." People always talked. It was the great pastime of small communities, this weaving of speculation into narrative. The pharmacist had learned to listen to such gossip, not for its truth, but for what it revealed about the speakers themselves. The Church of San Miguel was older than anything in the New World, its stones worn smooth by centuries of hands seeking blessing. Inside, the social hierarchy of the district displayed itself in careful arrangement. The Montemayor family occupied the front pew on the right, their wealth purchasing proximity to salvation. Behind them, the lesser landowners, the merchant families, then the artisans, and finally in the back, the laborers who worked the olive groves. The pharmacist found his place among the middle ranks, too educated for the back, too common for the front. It was a familiar position, this careful balance between worlds. From here, he could observe everyone. Don Ricardo sat rigidly upright, his attention fixed on the altar. Doña Isabel beside him seemed smaller than usual, diminished by the vast space and echoing acoustics. She held a rosary of black pearls that caught the light from the stained glass windows. Her lips moved in prayer, but her eyes held a distant quality, as if her spirit had wandered elsewhere. The priest, Father Miguel, was older than the pharmacist had expected, 61 years at least, with the kind of face that suggested he'd heard every sin the human heart could devise, and had stopped being surprised long ago. His sermon dealt with the parable of the vineyard workers, though he managed to work in observations about the changing times, the influence of foreign ideas, the importance of maintaining traditional values. After Mass, the congregation gathered in the courtyard where social commerce could be conducted under the guise of Christian fellowship. The pharmacist found himself cornered by the local doctor, a pompous man whose medical knowledge seemed to have stopped evolving sometime in the 1850s. "You're the specialist from Seville," the doctor said, making it sound like an accusation. "Come to cure our mysterious lady, have you?" "I've come to catalog the greenhouse collection," the pharmacist replied mildly. "Ah, yes, plants." The doctor's tone suggested what he thought of botanical medicine. "I've told Don Ricardo repeatedly, his wife suffers from hysteria, common in women of her class. Too much education, not enough purpose." What she needs is children, occupation for her mind. The pharmacist made non-committal sounds while watching Doña Isabel across the courtyard. She stood with a group of merchant wives, their chatter washing over her like water over stone. Carmen hovered nearby, ready to intervene if her mistress showed signs of distress. "Excuse me," a voice said. Father Miguel had approached, his eyes sharp despite his age. "You're the pharmacist. I knew someone in your trade once, in Seville, Antonio Delgado. Perhaps you knew him?" The name hit like cold water. Antonio had been his mentor, the man who'd taught him to see beyond the obvious, to question what others accepted. "He trained me," the pharmacist admitted. "You knew him?" "We were boys together in Cordoba, before the calling claimed me and the plants claimed him." Father Miguel smiled. "He wrote to me sometimes. Said he'd found a promising student who could smell the difference between Turkish and Virginia tobacco at 50 paces. An exaggeration, but not by much. The pharmacist found himself warming to the priest. He was a good teacher. "Walk with me," Father Miguel suggested. They left the courtyard, strolling through the cemetery beside the church. Antonio also taught that illness often has more than one cause. The body, the mind, the soul, all can suffer, sometimes in concert. "You're speaking of Doña Isabel." "I'm speaking of many things." The priest paused beside an elaborate tomb, its marble angel weathered but still beautiful. "This was Don Ricardo's first wife. Died 8 years ago, only 23. Weak lungs, the doctor said. Don Ricardo mourned for a full year before his family insisted he remarry." The pharmacist studied the inscription. "Maria Elena de Montemayor, beloved wife, called to heaven too soon." "She was ill long?" 6 months of declining health. Don Ricardo was devoted, never left her side. Some say his attention was excessive. Love can become possession, you understand, and possession can become poisonous, the pharmacist finished. Father Miguel's expression was carefully neutral. "An interesting choice of words." They walked on, past simpler graves, markers of lives lived without the burden of wealth. The priest spoke of the district's history, the old Moorish families who'd converted centuries ago, the new money from the olive trade, the tensions between tradition and progress. But beneath his words ran a deeper current, a warning perhaps, or simply the observations of a man who'd watched human nature display itself in all its variations. "Doña Isabel's family, the Herreras, they're from Madrid," Father Miguel mentioned casually. "Cosmopolitan people. She writes to her cousin there weekly, or did, before the illness made holding a pen difficult. Carmen helps her now, I believe." Another piece of information filed away. The pharmacist was beginning to see the shape of things more clearly. A young woman from the capital, married to an older man in the provinces, a first wife who died after 6 months of illness, a husband whose love might be something else wearing love's mask. As they returned to the courtyard, they found a small commotion. Doña Isabel had fainted, her body crumpled on the stones like a dropped handkerchief. Don Ricardo knelt beside her, his face a study in public concern and private frustration. Carmen was already there, producing smelling salts from somewhere in her dress. The pharmacist pushed through the crowd, his medical training overriding social protocol. Doña Isabel's pulse was rapid but strong, her skin clammy but not dangerously so. "She needs air and shade," he said with authority that made people step back. They carried her to the carriage, Don Ricardo's jaw tight with embarrassment. Public weakness reflected on the family, suggested failures of blood or breeding. As they settled her on the cushions, her eyes fluttered open, fixing on the pharmacist with surprising clarity. "The roses," she whispered, "in the greenhouse. They never bloom properly. Ask yourself why." Carmen quickly placed a damp cloth on her mistress's forehead. "She's confused, the heat and incense." But the pharmacist had heard the message clearly. The greenhouse roses. Another puzzle piece, offered by a woman everyone dismissed as hysteric. He stepped back as Don Ricardo climbed into the carriage, his hand possessive on his wife's wrist. Watching them drive away, Father Miguel appeared at his elbow. "Antonio always said you had a gift for seeing patterns. I hope that gift serves you well here." The pharmacist nodded slowly. Patterns were emerging indeed, though none of them promised comfort. He thought of the synthetic gardenia scent, the warm walls, the greenhouse full of botanical possibilities. Tomorrow, he would examine those roses that wouldn't bloom. Sometimes, the most important evidence was found in what failed to thrive. Monday arrived with unseasonable heat that made the greenhouse feel like the inside of a bottle left in the sun. The pharmacist had risen before dawn, eager to examine the roses Doña Isabel had mentioned, but first he needed to investigate something more pressing: the bedroom where the nocturnal phenomena occurred. Don Ricardo had left for Seville on business, something about meeting English buyers for the autumn olive harvest. His absence created opportunity. Esperanza, that guardian of household proprieties, was occupied with the weekly laundry. The pharmacist climbed the stairs with practiced quiet, his soft-soled boots making barely a whisper on the wood. Doña Isabel's bedroom door stood open. Carmen was changing the bedding, her movements efficient but careful. She looked up at his approach, no surprise on her face. "She's in the garden," she said simply. "The morning air helps clear her head after bad nights." "I need to examine the room more thoroughly," he said, "in daylight." Carmen studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll make sure no one disturbs you. 20 minutes, no more. Esperanza has eyes everywhere." Left alone, the pharmacist worked methodically. The room was elegant, but not ostentatious. Pale blue silk covered the walls, the pattern one of climbing vines and small flowers. French, definitely, from the workshops in Lyon that specialized in luxury fabrics. He ran his fingers along the surface, feeling again that unusual warmth he'd noticed during the nocturnal episode. Near the fireplace, the warmth was more pronounced. He knelt, examining the wall closely with his magnifying glass. There, tiny crystals embedded in the fabric, almost invisible unless you knew to look. He scraped a few into a vial, then moved to other sections of the room. The crystal deposits were everywhere, but concentrated near heat sources. The fireplace, the spots where afternoon sun would strike through the windows. His nose detected it now, faint but unmistakable. The base chemical smell beneath the silk's dye and sizing. Something organic, but processed, refined. He'd need his testing equipment to be certain, but already a hypothesis was forming. The house remained quiet as he made his way to the greenhouse. The roses were in the northeastern section, a collection that should have been magnificent. The plants were healthy enough, good root systems, proper pruning, but the blooms were few, and those that existed were small, pale, as if something essential had been drained from them. He examined the soil, the feeding schedule noted in the previous pharmacist's journals. Everything seemed correct, yet the roses failed, unless he dug deeper into the soil, past the surface amendments, down to where the roots spread. His fingers found something unexpected: fragments of glass, chemical residue that shouldn't exist in garden soil. Someone had been burying waste here, chemical waste from experiments. The roses were failing because their roots were slowly being poisoned. In the old pharmacist's laboratory section of the greenhouse, the pieces began connecting. The man's journals, which the pharmacist had been studying each evening, revealed increasing obsession with concentrated essences, not just for medicine, but for other purposes. There were notes about environmental applications and sustained release through thermal activation. He found it in the third journal, dated 6 months before the old man's death. A formula for synthetic gardenia essence, stabilized with compounds that would crystallize when applied to fabric. Heat would cause the crystals to sublime, releasing the scent gradually. The old pharmacist had been developing it for the textile industry, a way to create permanently scented fabrics. But there was a note in the margin, in different ink, added later. RM requests modification, stronger concentration, activated at body temperature, premium payment offered. RM, Ricardo Montemayor. The pharmacist sat back, pieces falling into place with terrible clarity. Don Ricardo had commissioned the scent, had it applied to his wife's bedroom walls. But why? Control, certainly. Keep her ill enough to prevent travel, social engagements, perhaps meetings with someone specific. The cousin in Madrid she wrote to so faithfully. He heard footsteps and quickly closed the journal. Carmen appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. Doña Isabel is asking for you. She's in the small library. The lady of the house was paler than usual, seated at a writing desk where several letters lay half-finished. Her hands shook slightly as she set down her pen. I'm told you were examining my room this morning. There was no point in denial. I was. And did you find anything illuminating? He chose his words carefully. I found evidence that your affliction may have a material cause rather than a supernatural one. She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. How comforting to know one is being poisoned by science rather than spirits. At his sharp look, she continued, I'm not a fool, senor. A smell that comes with heat, that's strongest near the walls? Either our house is haunted by a very particular ghost, or someone has done something to those walls. The pharmacist was impressed by her deduction. You suspected? I suspected many things. But suspicion and proof are different creatures. She picked up one of the letters, then set it down again. My cousin in Madrid, she married for love. A radical notion, I know. She writes of theater, cafes, conversations that last until dawn. I write back of gardenias. Your husband is a man of property who married me for connections my family could provide. I knew this, accepted it. But I did not expect, she gestured vaguely at the walls around them, this level of management. Carmen stood by the door keeping watch, but clearly listening. The pharmacist noticed the maid's hand clench slightly at Doña Isabel's words. Interesting. Protective anger, not just servant's concern. Can you prove it? Doña Isabel asked. What he's done? I can prove what was done. Proving who ordered it, that's more complex. The old pharmacist's journals suggest a commission, but Don Ricardo could claim ignorance, say the man acted alone, misunderstood instructions. And he's dead, unable to contradict. She was silent for a moment. You know, Signor, there's something almost admirable in the completeness of it. Every detail considered, every avenue of escape closed. My husband would have made an excellent general. Or a prisoner warden, Carmen muttered, then colored at her boldness. Doña Isabel smiled slightly. Yes, that too. She stood, swaying slightly, and the pharmacist moved instinctively to steady her. What would you advise, Signor? Speaking as a medical man. The fabric needs to be removed or neutralized. I can create a solution that would break down the crystals, render them inert, but it would need to be done carefully, without arousing suspicion. And if suspicion is aroused? He met her gaze directly. Then we must hope your husband values his reputation more than his control. She nodded slowly, understanding the implications. A scandal would destroy Don Ricardo's business prospects with the English buyers. But it would also destroy her social standing, leave her vulnerable in ways that might be worse than her current situation. There's something else, she said quietly. The first wife, Maria Elena, she had breathing problems in her final months, difficulty with certain scents. I wonder now. The pharmacist wondered too, but that was a darker path than he was prepared to walk just yet. One poisoning at a time, he thought grimly. First, he needed to save the living. The dead would have to wait their turn for justice. The pharmacist's laboratory work consumed the next 3 days. In the greenhouse's preparation room, he conducted experiment after experiment, heating fabric samples he'd carefully extracted from behind a loose corner of Doña Isabel's bedroom wallpaper. Each test confirmed his worst suspicions. The synthetic Gardenia compound was ingenious in its cruelty, designed to release its potent scent at precisely the temperature of a warmed room or feverish body. Wednesday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Carmen's younger brother Manuel arrived at the greenhouse carrying a basket from his sister. The boy was perhaps 17, thin but with intelligent eyes that reminded the pharmacist of Carmen herself. She sends bread and cheese, Manuel said, but his attention was clearly on the laboratory equipment. Are these distillation vessels? You know chemistry? The pharmacist asked, surprised. I read what I can find. The priest has some old texts. The longing in his voice was unmistakable. Here was a mind hungry for knowledge, trapped by circumstance. The pharmacist found himself explaining his current experiment, watching the boy absorb information like dry earth taking water. When Manuel mentioned his persistent cough, a condition that prevented him from harder labor, the pharmacist prepared a tincture of wild thyme and eucalyptus, medicines readily available from the greenhouse stores. Your sister worries about you, the pharmacist observed. She saves every coin for my education, says I could study in Seville someday, maybe even Madrid. Manuel's expression darkened. But with our father dead and mother ill, it's just dreams. After the boy left, the pharmacist returned to his primary investigation with renewed determination. These were the stakes. Not just Doña Isabel's health, but the futures of people like Carmen and Manuel, dependent on the whims of men like Don Ricardo. That evening he made his breakthrough. By adding iron sulfate to the fabric sample and heating it slowly, he could observe the exact moment the crystals began to sublime. 32 degrees, just above normal room temperature on a warm night, easily achieved by a bedroom fireplace or the accumulated heat of a sunny day trapped behind heavy curtains.
But more importantly, he discovered that ammonia vapors would neutralize the compound, breaking it down into harmless components.
A solution of ammonia water, carefully applied to the walls, would end Doña Isabel's torment. The challenge would be applying it without Don Ricardo's knowledge. He was so absorbed in his calculations that he didn't hear Esperanza enter until she spoke. "You work late, senor?" The housekeeper stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. For a moment, the pharmacist wondered if she would raise an alarm, report his suspicious activities. "The roses," she said finally. "You've discovered why they fail to thrive." "Chemical contamination in the soil," he replied carefully. "From the old pharmacist's experiments." It wasn't a question. He was a brilliant man, but careless with disposal, always in too much hurry to please Don Ricardo. There was weight in those words. The pharmacist waited. "The first senora also loved roses," Esperanza continued. "They bloomed beautifully then, before the experiments began." She moved into the room, her fingers trailing along the workbench. "I've been housekeeper here 18 years. I see much, say little. It's how one survives. But sometimes silence becomes complicity." She looked at him directly. "What have you discovered about the current senora's affliction?" The pharmacist made a quick decision to trust her. He explained about the treated fabric, the heat-activated compound, the synthetic Gardenia essence. Esperanza listened without expression, but her knuckles whitened as she gripped the table edge. "Can you stop it?" "I can neutralize it, but I need access to the room for several hours, and the smell of ammonia will be noticeable." "Don Ricardo returns from Seville tomorrow evening. During siesta, while he rests from his journey, I could arrange for the senora to visit the parish with Carmen, women's charity work. 3 hours, perhaps 4. "That would be sufficient," Esperanza nodded slowly. "The first senora, Maria Elena, she was like a daughter to me. I watched her fade, thinking it was God's will. Now I wonder if God had less to do with it than man's chemistry." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Be careful, senor. Don Ricardo is not a man who accepts defeat easily." Thursday arrived heavy with heat and tension. Don Ricardo returned at noon, dusty from travel but pleased with his business negotiations. "The English are demanding higher quality," he announced at lunch, "but they'll pay premium prices. We'll need to modernize the processing facilities." Doña Isabel barely touched her food, the heat and her husband's presence seeming to drain what little energy she possessed. The pharmacist watched Don Ricardo, watching his wife, saw the calculation in his eyes. Was she too ill to protest changes to the estate? Too weak to insist on traveling to Seville for the autumn season? After the meal, as planned, Esperanza suggested the charity visit. "The poor families near the river need medicines, senora. Your presence would comfort them." Don Ricardo waved dismissively. "Yes, go. The heat is insufferable anyway." As soon as the carriage departed, the pharmacist set to work. He'd prepared the ammonia solution that morning, adding lavender oil to partially mask the sharp smell. Working methodically, he sprayed each wall section, watching the silk darken slightly as the solution penetrated. The chemical reaction was immediate. He could almost see the embedded crystals dissolving, their poisonous potential neutralizing. The work was exhausting in the afternoon heat,
made worse by the need to keep windows closed to prevent the smell from escaping. Sweat ran down his back as he worked, but he continued steadily, thoroughly, ensuring no section was missed.
He was finishing the last wall when he heard footsteps on the stairs. Too heavy for Esperanza, too confident for a servant. His heart seized as Don Ricardo appeared in the doorway, his siesta apparently cut short. "What are you doing in my wife's bedroom?" The pharmacist's mind raced. "Treating the walls, senor. I discovered fungal growth that could be contributing to the senora's breathing difficulties. The heat and humidity create perfect conditions for such infestations." Don Ricardo's eyes narrowed. He entered the room, nostrils flaring at the ammonia smell. "Fungus? Aspergillus. Common in silk wallpapers. The spores can cause severe respiratory reactions, headaches, even hallucinations in sensitive individuals." The pharmacist kept his voice steady, scientific. "I've seen similar cases in Seville. The treatment should eliminate the problem." For a long moment, Don Ricardo said nothing. The pharmacist could almost see him calculating. The cost of accusation versus acceptance, the risk of exposure versus the loss of control. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously soft. "And you took it upon yourself to treat my wife's bedroom without consultation? I thought to spare you the concern until I was certain. If I was wrong, no harm done. If right," he shrugged, letting Don Ricardo complete the thought. "If right, you've solved our mystery." Don Ricardo's smile was cold. "How fortunate we are to have such an enterprising pharmacist." The threat in his words was clear, but so was the calculation. To challenge the pharmacist now would require explaining why he objected to treating a fungal infection. It would raise questions better left unasked. "I'll expect a full report," Don Ricardo said finally. "And in future, you will consult me before taking any such initiatives." "Of course, senor." Don Ricardo left, his footsteps echoing with controlled anger. The pharmacist exhaled slowly, hands trembling slightly as reaction set in. The first battle was won, but the war was far from over. The morning after the wall treatment revealed its success in the most mundane way, Doña Isabel appeared at breakfast, not the wan, trembling appearance of recent weeks, but actually sitting at the table, eating toast with apparent appetite. Don Ricardo watched his wife with an expression the pharmacist couldn't quite read. Was it concern? Suspicion? Or perhaps the dawning realization that his control was slipping? "You slept well, my dear?" Don Ricardo's tone was perfectly neutral. "Remarkably well. No disturbances." She glanced at the pharmacist. "Perhaps the fungal treatment worked." "Fungus," Don Ricardo repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "How fortunate we discovered it." The pharmacist focused on his coffee, aware of the undercurrents flowing beneath this civil breakfast conversation. Carmen stood by the sideboard, her relief at her mistress's improvement barely concealed. Esperanza moved between kitchen and dining room with her usual efficiency, but he caught her watching Don Ricardo with sharp attention. After breakfast, the pharmacist retreated to the greenhouse, needing the familiar comfort of his plants and preparations. He found Manuel there, carefully tending to seedlings as the pharmacist had shown him during his previous visit. "Carmen says the senora is better," the boy said without preamble. "She says you're a miracle worker." "Hardly that. Simply a man who pays attention to details." The pharmacist examined Manuel's work. The boy had real talent, an intuitive understanding of what plants needed. "Your cough sounds improved." "The medicine helps. I've been sleeping better, working longer without tiring." Manuel hesitated. "Carmen says Don Ricardo is angry about something, that you should be careful." Warnings from all quarters, it seemed. The pharmacist nodded his thanks and sent the boy on his way with a fresh supply of tincture and instructions to continue the treatment for another fortnight. The afternoon brought an unexpected summons from Don Ricardo. The pharmacist found him in his study, examining what appeared to be business correspondence, though his attention seemed elsewhere. "Tell me about Seville," Don Ricardo said without preamble. "Your practice there." An odd question, but the pharmacist answered carefully, describing his small shop near the cathedral, his regular clients, the physicians who consulted him for difficult cases. Don Ricardo listened with apparent interest, occasionally asking pointed questions about specific preparations, chemical processes, the availability of certain compounds. "And your wife," Don Ricardo said suddenly. "I'm told you're recently widowed." The pharmacist's chest tightened. "4 months ago, consumption." "Ah. Unable to heal the one who mattered most. That must be difficult to bear." There was something in Don Ricardo's voice, not sympathy, but a kind of recognition. "My first wife also died of lung disease, despite all the doctors, all the treatments money could buy. One feels so helpless watching them fade." For a moment, the pharmacist saw past Don Ricardo's controlled facade to something more complex underneath. A man who had perhaps loved too possessively, controlled too tightly, and lost anyway. Did that loss drive him to ensure he'd never feel such helplessness again? "Sometimes," Don Ricardo continued, "we must take extraordinary measures to protect what we have. Surely you understand that." The pharmacist did understand, perhaps too well. The laudanum vial in his pocket was testament to his own extraordinary measures against grief. "Understanding and approving are different things, Senor." Don Ricardo's expression hardened again. "Indeed they are. You may go." That evening, the pharmacist was intercepted by Carmen near the servants' stairs. "Doña Isabel wishes to thank you," she said quietly, "but not openly. She's in the chapel." The estate's private chapel was small, intimate, with that particular smell of old incense and candle wax that seemed to permeate Catholic spaces. Doña Isabel knelt before the altar, but rose when he entered, her movements already showing more strength. "I wanted to thank you properly," she said. "Last night was the first time in 6 months I've slept without nightmares of drowning in flower petals." "The treatment should hold," he assured her, "though vigilance will be necessary. Your husband might attempt other methods." She laughed, bitter but not defeated. "Oh, I'm certain he will. But now I know to look for earthly causes rather than heavenly punishments." She moved closer, lowering her voice. "Carmen has been teaching her brother chemistry from your lessons. She has ambitions for him. He's intelligent, with proper education, which requires money. I have some jewelry, gifts from my family before marriage. They're mine to dispose of. Would 300 pesetas be enough to send him to Seville for study?" The pharmacist was moved by her generosity, especially given her own precarious position. "It would be a good start, but your husband need not know. Carmen has been my true friend through this ordeal. It's little enough repayment." She glanced at the altar. "I used to pray for deliverance.
Now I think perhaps God sends deliverance in unexpected forms. A pharmacist with a keen nose and a brave heart, for instance. Before he could respond, they heard footsteps approaching. Doña Isabel immediately knelt again, resuming her prayers. Esperanza appeared in the doorway. "Don Ricardo is looking for you, Señor. He has questions about the greenhouse inventory." More questions, more probing.
The pharmacist was beginning to feel like a specimen under examination. Don Ricardo's searching for weakness, for leverage. He excused himself and followed Esperanza, who paused once they were out of earshot. "He's been in the old pharmacist's laboratory," she whispered, "looking through journals, checking chemical supplies. He knows you know." The game was shifting, becoming more dangerous. The pharmacist thought of the evidence he'd collected: fabric samples, chemical analyses, the old pharmacist's notes. Enough to prove what had been done. Perhaps not enough to prove who had ordered it. And Don Ricardo was wealthy, connected, with influence in local courts. Justice might be as elusive as the synthetic Gardenia scent had been. In the greenhouse, Don Ricardo stood among the roses, studying their sickly blooms with apparent interest. "These roses," he said as the pharmacist approached. "You mentioned contaminated soil. Chemical residue from improper disposal. It will take time for the soil to recover, or we could simply replace it all, start fresh. Sometimes that's the best solution when something is irredeemably poisoned." He looked directly at the pharmacist. "Don't you agree?" The threat was obvious. The pharmacist met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes, but often with patience and the right treatment, even poisoned ground can be healed." They stood there among the failing roses, two men measuring each other, calculating risks and advantages. Finally, Don Ricardo smiled, cold and sharp. "We shall see, shan't we? Continue your work, pharmacist. Complete your catalog. I trust you'll be ready to return to Seville soon." "When my commission is complete, Señor." "Yes, completion. We all look forward to that." After Don Ricardo left, the pharmacist stood alone among the roses, thinking. He had allies now: Esperanza, Carmen, even Doña Isabel herself. But Don Ricardo was mobilizing his own forces, preparing for a battle the pharmacist hadn't anticipated. The morning's victory might prove temporary if he couldn't find a way to ensure Doña Isabel's permanent safety. He thought of his mentor, Antonio, who had always said that the most powerful medicine was truth, properly administered. Perhaps it was time to consider a stronger dose. The pharmacist spent the early morning hours of Friday creating his insurance policy. Detailed copies of every piece of evidence, sealed in wax and entrusted to Father Miguel with specific instructions. The priest accepted the package without surprise, as if he'd been expecting this moment since their conversation in the cemetery. "If something happens to me," the pharmacist said quietly, "ensure these reach the authorities in Seville, not the local magistrate." Father Miguel nodded slowly. "Don Ricardo's influence extends far, but not to the capital." "You're playing a dangerous game, my friend." "It's no longer a game. Doña Isabel's improvement has made him desperate. Last night I found evidence that someone had been in my room, searching through my papers." The priest's expression grew grave. "Perhaps you should leave, today." "And abandon her to whatever new torment he devises?" "No. But I need one more piece of evidence, something that connects him directly to the commission."
That evidence came from an unexpected source. Esperanza found him in the greenhouse at midday, carrying a small leather journal. "This was hidden in Don Ricardo's study," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Behind a false panel I've known about for years but never had cause to open. Until now." The journal contained Don Ricardo's private accounts, not the official estate records, but personal transactions he'd kept hidden. There, in his own hand, was an entry from the previous September. "Payment to Monsieur
Santos for special preparation, 300 pesetas. Additional 100 for discretion. M. Santos, the old pharmacist, Martin Santos. The dates aligned perfectly with the journal entries about the synthetic Gardenia compound, but there was more. Similar payments dating back 8 years to the time of the first wife's illness. "This is enough," the pharmacist said, though his hands trembled slightly. "This proves pattern, intent." "He's planning something," Esperanza warned. "This morning he sent Carmen on an errand to the village, insisted she stay overnight with her family. He wants her away from Doña Isabel." The pieces were falling into place. With Carmen gone, Doña Isabel would be isolated, vulnerable. The pharmacist thought quickly. "Can you get word to Carmen? Tell her to go to Father Miguel instead of home. She'll be safer there." Esperanza nodded and hurried away. The pharmacist returned to his laboratory, mind racing. He needed to act before Don Ricardo could implement whatever plan he'd conceived. But how to confront a powerful man without becoming his next victim? The answer came while preparing Manuel's medicine. The boy arrived for his regular dose, eager to help with the botanical work. As the pharmacist watched him carefully measuring ingredients, an idea formed. "Manuel, do you know the civil guard captain in the village?" "Captain Morales? Yes, senor. He buys vegetables from our mother." "I need you to deliver something to him, quietly, without anyone seeing you leave the estate." The pharmacist quickly wrote a note, sealed it, and included a sample of the treated fabric. "Tell him to test this with the provincial chemist. Tell him it's urgent, related to a possible crime." Manuel's eyes widened, but he took the package without question. Youth had its advantages. A boy running errands attracted less attention than a man with secrets. That afternoon, Don Ricardo's plan revealed itself. He announced at lunch that he'd engaged a specialist from Granada to examine Doña Isabel. "Dr. Herrera comes highly recommended for cases of female hysteria. He'll arrive tomorrow morning." The pharmacist knew the name. Herrera was notorious for his aggressive treatments, including extended stays in his private sanitarium. Women entered with nervous conditions and emerged months later docile, broken, or sometimes not at all. Doña Isabel's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure. "I feel much improved, husband. Perhaps such measures aren't necessary." "Nonsense. Your recent improvement could be temporary. We must be thorough." His tone brooked no argument. After lunch, the pharmacist found Doña Isabel in the greenhouse, ostensibly admiring the orchid collection, but clearly seeking sanctuary. "He means to have me committed," she said simply. "Not if I can prevent it." He explained about the evidence, the civil guard, the preparations he'd made. "But we need to keep you safe until help arrives." She touched one of the orchids gently, its delicate petals trembling. "You know, I used to love flowers before all this. Now they feel like beautiful prisoners, kept in glass cages for others' pleasure." "These orchids are epiphytes," the pharmacist told her. "They don't need soil, just air and moisture. They're not imprisoned, they're protected while they grow strong enough to survive on their own." She smiled slightly at the metaphor. "And when will I be strong enough?" "Sooner than you think. Your body is already recovering. Your mind was never broken, despite what they'd have you believe." That evening, tension filled the house like smoke before a fire. Don Ricardo watched everyone with suspicious eyes. The pharmacist maintained his routine, working on his catalog, preparing medicines, giving no sign of the storm approaching. As night fell, Esperanza came to his laboratory with disturbing news.
Don Ricardo has locked Doña Isabel in her room. For her safety, he claims, while she's in such a delicate state. The pharmacist's jaw clenched. The man was accelerating his timeline, perhaps sensing the walls closing in. Where is he now? His study, drinking brandy and writing letters, probably to that doctor in Granada, finalizing arrangements. The pharmacist made a decision. If the civil guard didn't arrive by morning, he'd have to take more direct action. He spent the next hours preparing two solutions, one a powerful sedative that could be added to brandy without detection, the other an antidote to the same. Insurance in case violence became necessary. Near midnight, Manuel returned, slipping through the greenhouse door like a shadow. Captain Morales says he'll come at first light with his men. The provincial chemist confirmed the fabric was treated with a toxic substance. They're taking this very seriously. Relief flooded through the pharmacist. Good boy. Now go home. Stay there tomorrow. Things may become unpleasant. But Manuel shook his head. Carmen's at the priest's house. She sent word. She's coming back tonight, secretly. She won't leave Doña Isabel alone, no matter what Don Ricardo ordered. Loyalty and courage, the pharmacist thought, often appeared in unexpected forms. He gave Manuel a dose of sleeping draught. For your mother. Tell her it will help with her pain. Keep her resting tomorrow. She doesn't need to witness what's coming. As Manuel disappeared into the darkness, the pharmacist prepared for the longest night of his ordeal. Tomorrow would bring either justice or catastrophe. He thought of his wife, how she'd always accused him of being too cautious, too willing to work within systems that protected the powerful. Not this time, mi amor, he whispered to her memory. This time, I choose the harder path. He settled in to wait for dawn, his preparations complete, his allies in position. The house around him slept uneasily, as if the very walls sensed the coming reckoning. In her locked room, Doña Isabel perhaps dreamed of freedom. In his study, Don Ricardo planned his next move, unaware that the game was already over. The pharmacist touched the vial of laudanum in his pocket one last time, then deliberately left it on the workbench. He wouldn't need that particular escape anymore. He had found a better medicine. Purpose, properly applied, with a dose of courage on the side. Dawn arrived wrapped in mist, the estate grounds ghostly in the pale light. The pharmacist had not slept, spending the hours arranging his evidence with the precision of a chemical formula, each element in its proper place, ready for the reaction to come. Through his window, he watched the road from the village, waiting for the dust cloud that would announce the civil guard's arrival. It came at 7, just as the household was stirring. 3 horses, moving with official purpose. The pharmacist descended quickly, wanting to meet them before Don Ricardo could prepare his defenses. Captain Morales was a man who wore his authority like comfortable clothes, neither flaunting nor hiding it. His weathered face suggested he'd seen enough human folly to surprise him little. You're the pharmacist who sent the evidence. I am. The situation is delicate. The lady of the house is in danger, but her husband is influential, clever. This must be handled carefully. The captain nodded. The provincial chemist was quite alarmed by what you sent.
Deliberate poisoning is a serious charge, but we need more than treated fabric. The pharmacist produced the copied pages from the old pharmacist's journal and Don Ricardo's private accounts. The captain examined them with growing interest. This suggests a pattern. But Don Ricardo could claim ignorance, say the old man misunderstood. Then let's allow him to demonstrate his character, the pharmacist suggested. He explained about Dr. Herrera's impending arrival, Don Ricardo's plan to have his wife committed. If confronted correctly, he might reveal himself. Voices from the house interrupted them. Don Ricardo had discovered the guard's presence. He emerged, still in his morning robe, but projecting outraged dignity. "Captain Morales, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" "A matter of some concern has been brought to our attention, Don Ricardo, regarding your wife's recent illness." Don Ricardo's eyes found the pharmacist cold with fury. "Ah, our helpful pharmacist has been telling tales. You should know, Captain, that this man has developed an unhealthy fascination with my wife. His accusations are clearly motivated by jealousy." It was a clever thrust, attempting to reframe the narrative, but the pharmacist had expected this. "Then you won't object to explaining these payments to Martin Santos for special preparations?" The captain held up the copied accounts. Don Ricardo's face went very still, calculating. "Business transactions. The old man provided many services for the estate, including treating your wife's bedroom walls with a toxic substance? That's absurd. Why would I poison my own wife?" It was Esperanza who answered, appearing in the doorway with Doña Isabel, whom she'd freed with her housekeeper's keys. The lady of the house was pale but composed, Carmen at her side. "To keep me ill enough to control, well enough to maintain appearances," Doña Isabel said clearly, "just as you did with Maria Elena." The accusation hung in the air like morning mist. Don Ricardo's expression shifted, anger giving way to something more complex. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping. "Either of you. Maria Elena was fragile, needed protection, as do you, Isabel. The world outside would devour you." "Protection," Doña Isabel repeated. "Is that what you call it?" The pharmacist watched Don Ricardo carefully, seeing the man's carefully constructed justifications beginning to crack. This was the crucial moment. Push too hard and he'd retreat behind legal defenses. Too soft and he'd regain control. "The first wife's symptoms," the pharmacist said quietly, "were remarkably similar. Breathing difficulties, sensitivity to scents. The old pharmacist's journals mention experimenting with aerosol compounds around that time." Don Ricardo's jaw clenched. "You can't prove anything about Maria Elena. She's been dead 8 years. "No," Captain Morales interjected, "but we can prove what you did to your current wife. The treated fabric, the payments, the synthetic Gardenia compound. It's enough for charges. And if I say the old man acted alone, misinterpreted innocent requests," the pharmacist played his final card. "Then explain why you locked your wife in a room last night, why you summoned Dr. Herrera to have her committed. The actions of an innocent man?" For a long moment, Don Ricardo said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a bitter sound. "You think you've won. You think you've saved her. I was trying to save her. From herself, from the world, from the fate that awaits women who forget their place. "That wasn't your choice to make," Doña Isabel said softly. Something in her voice seemed to reach him. The rigid control that defined Don Ricardo crumbled slightly. "I loved her," he said, and for once the pharmacist believed he meant it. "Maria Elena. I loved her too much. When she died, despite everything I did to protect her, to keep her safe, I swore I wouldn't fail again." "But you did fail," Doña Isabel said. "The moment you chose control over trust." Captain Morales cleared his throat. "Don Ricardo, you'll need to come with us. There are questions to answer, statements to be made." The pharmacist watched Don Ricardo straighten, pride reasserting itself. "May I dress first? I won't be dragged through the village in my nightclothes." The captain nodded. As Don Ricardo moved toward the house, he paused near the pharmacist. "You think you're righteous," he said quietly, "but you're just another man trying to save someone who reminds you of what you've lost. We're not so different." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. But the pharmacist met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps not, but I chose to heal rather than harm." Don Ricardo's smile was sad. "Did you? Ask yourself what happens to Isabel now. A woman alone, her husband disgraced, her reputation tainted by scandal. Is that healing?" He went inside before the pharmacist could answer. The question lingered, uncomfortable in its validity. Doña Isabel must have seen his expression because she approached, Carmen still at her side. "Don't let him poison your victory with doubt," she said. "Whatever comes next, I choose it freely. That's all I wanted. The freedom to choose." Within an hour, Don Ricardo emerged, dressed impeccably, carrying himself with the dignity of a man going to a business meeting rather than an arrest. He entered the guard's carriage without protest, though his final look at the estate held something like grief. Dr. Herrera arrived from Granada shortly after, only to be turned away by Captain Morales. The specialist's indignation at losing his fee provided a moment of dark comedy in the morning's drama. As the dust settled, literally and figuratively, the household stood in strange suspension. Esperanza took charge with her usual efficiency, directing servants, maintaining routines. The estate would continue functioning, regardless of its master's fate. The pharmacist found himself in the greenhouse, needing the familiar comfort of his plants. Among the sick roses, he began the careful work of replacing the contaminated soil, giving them a chance to bloom again. It would take time, patience, but it could be done. Carmen appeared with Manuel, the boy eager to help with the restoration. As they worked together, the pharmacist felt something shifting, healing beginning, not just in the garden, but in the very atmosphere of the estate. "What will happen to Don Ricardo?" Manuel asked. The pharmacist considered his answer. "He'll face justice, though probably not as much as he deserves. Men of his station rarely do. But he'll lose his control, his reputation. For him, that might be worse than prison." "And Doña Isabel?" "She'll heal. She'll choose her own path." The boy nodded, understanding more than his years might suggest. They returned to their work, 3 people rebuilding a garden, perhaps rebuilding themselves in the process. The morning mist had burned away, revealing a day of unexpected clarity. 3 weeks had passed since Don Ricardo's arrest, and the estate of Las Gardenias existed in a strange state of peaceful suspension. June had arrived with its fuller heat, but the mornings still held coolness, and it was in such a morning that the pharmacist made his final rounds through the greenhouse. His catalog was complete, the medicinal preparations organized and labeled, detailed instructions left for whoever would tend them next. The roses had already begun to show improvement. New growth emerged, pale green and hopeful from the cleansed soil, and here and there, tight buds promised future blooms. He touched one gently, satisfied with this small victory over poison. "You're really leaving today?" Manuel stood in the doorway, no longer the thin coughing boy who'd first visited, but standing straighter, breathing easier. "My work here is finished. And you have your own journey ahead." The boy had received his acceptance to the academy in Seville, funded by the discreet sale of Doña Isabel's jewelry and a surprising contribution from Esperanza's own savings. "I'll write to you," Manuel promised, "tell you how the studies progress." "I'd like that." The pharmacist handed him a leather journal, well-worn but serviceable. "This was mine when I was learning. Perhaps it will serve you." The boy clutched it like a treasure, then impulsively embraced the pharmacist before hurrying away, embarrassed by his display of emotion. Youth, the pharmacist thought with fondness, always caught between feeling too much and showing too little. Doña Isabel found him an hour later as he was packing his laboratory equipment. She wore a simple gray dress, mourning colors, though her husband lived. He'd been sentenced to 5 years exile rather than prison, his properties placed in trust for his wife. Spanish justice, as always, finding ways to punish without destroying those of proper bloodlines. "I wanted to thank you once more," she said, though they both knew thanks were inadequate for what had transpired. "You've thanked me enough. Besides, I did what any man of conscience would do." She smiled at that. "We both know that's untrue. Most men of conscience find ways to avoid seeing what discomforts them." She moved to the window, looking out at the estate grounds. "I'm selling this place, you know. Once the legal matters are settled. My cousin in Madrid has invited me to stay with her. There's talk of opening a school for girls, something progressive. I might help with that." "That sounds like a worthy pursuit. Yes, teaching young women to recognize cages before they're locked inside them." She turned back to him. "What about you? Back to Seville?" "For now, though I'm thinking of taking on an apprentice. Manuel will need guidance beyond what the academy provides." "He's fortunate to have you." She paused, seeming to gather herself for something difficult. "I need to tell you something. About Don Ricardo." The pharmacist waited, knowing she needed to speak more than he needed to hear. "I received a letter from him yesterday, from Santander, where he's settled. He wrote, it was strange, almost like a confession, but also a justification. He truly believed he was protecting Maria Elena and me. In his mind, the world was full of threats only he could see, dangers only he could prevent." "The most dangerous men often believe they're heroes," the pharmacist observed. "Yes, but here's what haunts me. I almost understand it. The fear of losing someone, the desperate need to keep them safe. If I had his power, his certainty, might I have done the same?" The pharmacist thought of his own dark period after his wife's death, the laudanum that had promised escape from pain. "We all have the capacity for both healing and harm. The choice is what defines us." "Choice," she repeated the word softly. "Such a simple thing, yet it took so much to claim it." Carmen appeared as she always seemed to when her mistress needed her. "The carriage is ready for the señor's departure." The farewells were brief, Esperanza with a firm handshake and a package of food for the journey, Carmen with shy thanks for all he'd taught her about medicines,
Father Miguel with a blessing and a knowing smile. As the carriage pulled away from Las Gardenias, the pharmacist looked back once. The estate sat serene in the morning light, its white walls giving no hint of the dramas they'd contained. The greenhouse gleamed, its glass panels catching the sun like captured fire. Beautiful and terrible, like so many things in this world. The journey back to Seville gave him time to think. Don Ricardo had been wrong about many things, but perhaps right about one. The pharmacist had been trying to save someone, to succeed where he'd failed with his wife. But in the process, something unexpected had happened. He'd saved himself as well. The laudanum vial still sat on the greenhouse workbench where he'd left it that night 3 weeks ago. He'd forgotten about it entirely until packing, then deliberately left it behind. Let it be disposed of with the other dangerous compounds. He didn't need that escape anymore. The road wound through the olive groves, their ancient trees standing patient in the heat. The pharmacist thought about cycles, poison and cure, sickness and health, captivity and freedom. Everything in nature sought balance, and perhaps human lives were no different. Don Ricardo had tried to stop that cycle, to freeze his wives in permanent safety, permanent illness. But life, like chemistry, demanded change, reaction, transformation. He pulled out his notebook, thinking to record some observations from the case, but found himself writing something else entirely. The art of medicine, he wrote, lies not only in identifying the poison, but in understanding why someone chose to administer it. Fear, love, jealousy, control. These too are compounds that can toxic in concentration. The true pharmacist must treat not just the body, but the circumstances that allow illness to flourish. He thought of Doña Isabel preparing for her new life in Madrid, of Manuel soon to begin his studies, of Carmen, who would accompany her mistress to the capital, perhaps to find her own education there. Even Esperanza had plans to visit a sister in Valencia she hadn't seen in years, free now from the duty that had bound her to Las Gardenias. Everyone moving forward, choosing new paths. Even Don Ricardo, in his exile, would have to find some new way to exist without the control that had defined him. Whether that would bring redemption or merely different forms of damage remained to be seen. The coach stopped at a way station to water the horses. The pharmacist stepped out, stretching his legs, breathing the afternoon air that smelled of dust and wild thyme. A fellow traveler, a merchant bound for Cordoba, engaged him in conversation about the weather, the roads, the quality of this year's olive harvest. Normal things, mundane concerns, blessedly free of mystery or malice. "You look like a man with a story," the merchant observed. "Something in your eyes." The pharmacist smiled. "We all have stories. Most of them are quite ordinary. And some remind us that ordinary life is itself a blessing." The merchant laughed, not understanding, but appreciating the philosophy nonetheless. They returned to their respective coaches, the journey resuming. As Seville's towers appeared on the horizon, the pharmacist felt something settling in his chest. Not quite peace, but perhaps its cousin, acceptance. He would return to his shop, his work, his quiet life of measuring and mixing and healing small ailments. But he would do so with new knowledge, new purpose. The Gardenia curse was broken, its synthetic perfume dissipated into memory. In its place,
The promise of real flowers, honest scents, growth that came from healthy soil rather than hidden poison. It was enough. More than enough. The sun was setting as he reached his shop, painting the cathedral walls gold and rose. He unlocked the door, breathed in the familiar smell of herbs and chemicals, felt himself truly home for the first time since his wife's death. Tomorrow, there would be work, prescriptions to fill, consultations to give, perhaps a letter to write to Doña Isabel, wishing her well in her new life. But tonight, he would sit in his small garden behind the shop, among plants that grew freely without greenhouse glass. And he would remember that sometimes the greatest medicine was simply the courage to reveal truth, to choose healing over harm, to trust that people, like gardens, could recover from poison if given the chance. The bells of the cathedral began their evening song, calling the faithful to prayer. The pharmacist listened, not faithful exactly, but grateful nonetheless. For mysteries solved, for justice served, however imperfectly. For the strange alchemy that could transform suffering into wisdom, isolation into connection, a curse into an unexpected blessing.